Welcome to the SaaS AdLab podcast, where we're going to the stories of SaaS founders, entrepreneurs, and CEOs. My name is Luis. I'm the founder of Fantôm agency, a digital marketing agency specialized in scaling SaaS companies. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing Miriam. She is the CEO and founder over at Strattic. First of all, thank you so much for being on here today. It's a pleasure having you. And I know it's late for you in Israel, so there's a bit of a time difference there. So I really appreciate, people like yourself that come on here and spend the time with myself. So first of all, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about, yourself and your background, really, like, how did you get into the space of SaaS and tech as well? It seems like you were in there before, building out Strattic. So just give us a little bit of a background, a little rundown on that.
Okay, sure. So I'm actually originally from Toronto, Canada, and I moved to Israel about 26 years ago. I studied English literature, which is a weird thing to study and then end up in SaaS, but it actually led me on a path that encouraged me to start looking into marketing and then start looking into how people use digital tools for marketing. And I started to explore website building, and I actually really loved that. And so I learned to build WordPress websites, and I started offering that as a business and built that up into an agency, which became one of the leading WordPress agencies in Israel. And we also worked with clients outside of Israel, but in Israel, we worked with a lot of tech companies building their front-facing WordPress websites, integrations with third-party services. And in a way, I guess that was maybe my first foray into the more startup SaaS tech world through my work there. Did that for 13 years. Really loved what I was doing. Always had ideas for products. Couldn't really pursue them at those times when they came into my head because I have kids and I was having kids, and it was too complicated then. But at a certain point, the idea for Strattic came into my mind based on the pain points that we and our clients in the industry were experienced related to security, performance, scalability. And I started to explore the world of static site generators, really loved what I saw there, thought, why not bring these two worlds together? And that's where the concept for Strattic was born.
Very, very cool. And how does that really, are you pretty much a very technical founder?
So in both companies, I started off very technical and then transitioned into a less technical role. So in my first company, in the web agency, I started out actually building websites. And when I made my first hire, I taught her everything. But then at a certain point, as the company grew, I became more focused on marketing and sales and business development and managing on that side of things. But I always stayed very, very in touch and very on top of developments in our industry. And that would inform how we worked with our clients and what type of services we would provide, and trying to always make sure that we were providing a very high level and in line with modern best practices. And then when I founded Strattic, so I was very involved in the initial technical side of the product, to the point where I had to learn to navigate Amazon Web Services. Something that I had always stayed far away from, because when you log into the AWS console, you see like 50 services and you have no idea where to start. But we built out our product on AWS, and I felt like it was important for me to have a good idea of what was going on there. But still, I had technical people working with me who built the initial prototypes, but I directed it. I had played a very strong role in directing it, the feature set, what is needed, what we can live without, that kind of stuff. And to this day, I do play that role as well on product.
Very cool. One thing that I see across the board with a lot of people, not everyone obviously, but a lot of people that I have on the podcast, is many of them start at some sort of agency where they help a lot of different clients. And then it seems like something clicks, right? Where you notice a certain thing happening across the board. And that's when you decide, I'm going to create the product. You mentioned earlier, though, that you kind of had those ideas, right? That they kept happening. Maybe you didn't necessarily, you didn't have the right way to pursue some of them or most of them. And what was that one thing that was missing before that wasn't missing for Strattic that you actually went for it?
So that's a really good question. There were a few things. One was my personal situation. So I actually have 7 children. And so that meant that for the duration of my career at my first company, Luminea, I was either before or after having a baby. And that there was no way I could do
Right.
managing the agency and raising a family like that.
Mm-hmm.
When the concept for Strattic came to me, my youngest was already a whopping like 3 years old. So she wasn't exactly in university or anything, but
Yeah.
she wasn't a baby anymore. And I knew that I was heading into a stage of life where I could invest in kind of my next baby.
Gotcha.
So that was one thing. But there were a few catalysts that really motivated me to pursue it as something that's worthwhile investing in.
Mm-hmm.
One was I was meeting with a client company of my previous Illuminea about building their website, a tech company. And the guy is a very smart engineer who I very much admire. And I said, everyone else left the room and it was just the two of us at that point. I said, there's all these problems. I have this idea. What do you think? And he was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And on the spot, he started kind of mapping out how we would architect it. And I was like,
Cool.
okay, if this really smart guy thinks something of it, then maybe there's something here. And he even like started working with me on it a bit. And he's also a very busy person. So that was motivating. And then I saw that the applications were open for an accelerator here in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, you know what? I'm going to apply and see how it goes. If it doesn't go anywhere, I'll continue what I'm doing.
Right.
If it does, then I'll have to reconsider. And I got accepted. They accepted like 13 startups out of 70 or 80 applicants.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, so if that room of smart people thought there's something here, it was, so those kinds of things play a very big role, I think, at least for me, like smart people who react really positively.
Right, like it's validating for the product and the idea as a whole.
Yeah. And to the point where they're willing to kind of invest in you in your pursuit of this idea. So that was, that first guy that I mentioned, and then the startup accelerator. You start to think, all right, maybe there's, I really felt there was something here, but if these people also think so, I'm gonna take the next steps. And so I joined the accelerator, and I highly, highly recommend to people to join accelerators at an early stage. It helps focus you and direct you and gives you tools and knowledge that you don't have. It's very good.
That's awesome. Now, and the whole journey, right? You had an agency, you were building out client websites and stuff like that. You had the idea, went to the accelerator. When do you realize, okay, it's time to go all into Strattic?
Yeah. So in the beginning, I was still managing Illuminea, the agency. And so let's say I was like 90% Illuminea and 10% Strattic. And then as time went on, Strattic started to gain more interest, more momentum. I transitioned kind of out of Illuminea. I handed over management to someone else on my team.
Okay, so
eventually,
is that agency still alive?
Yeah, so actually, it worked out that I transitioned the management over to someone else in the agency, started to really spend more time on Strattic, and then she joined me at Strattic, and Illuminea was acquired by Canadian Web Development Agency.
That's awesome.
So yeah, so that worked out really well. So thanks to my work at Illuminea, I was able to kind of support myself while initially working on Strattic. But then I saw Strattic was really worth going all in on, and that it was the future. It was the future for the internet. At least that's how I saw it. It was the future for me.
Yeah.
Also, I had been doing like the agency thing for 13 years, and I felt like I want to learn something new. I want to experience something new. So this was my opportunity. And I realized I needed a partner in it. Illuminea I had done on my own. This time around, I knew I needed a partner. And I didn't actually know how to start finding a partner. And then
why was that? Why did you think because thinking, I mean, I guess I'm putting myself in that perspective, right? If I've already done something by myself, even if like maybe it's egotistical, I'm not sure, but if I'm already in that position, I would have thought maybe I can do it by myself again, right? Up until the fact that maybe I come across something where I'm just lost and I say, okay, now I really need someone. But it sounds like from the get-go, you kind of you just knew that you were going to need somebody to be there with you through this new process.
So I wasn't so smart. I didn't realize how important it was to have a partner until I had a partner. But initially, I knew I wanted to find a partner for a few reasons. One is when you start talking to investors, they really want to see a founding team.
Mm.
When they see a solo founder, it's a bit of a red flag, and it makes things harder. And there's a reason for it. It's not because they're demanding something unreasonable. It's because more heads in the game will do better.
Right.
So that's a very simplistic explanation of it, but it's true. And the other thing is that in my agency, I really had a lot of strengths. I had technical, I like gained business, savvy, marketing. I was able to do pretty much everything on my own well enough. But I knew that with this, it would demand characteristics or knowledge or skills that I didn't have. So on the fundraising side, sales and business development, but like on a bigger scale, I knew I didn't have that, and I knew I wanted to find someone like that. I didn't know how it was going to happen, and someone I knew-ish reached out, and the startup that he had been part of was shutting down because they had burned through all their money, like many startups do, and he was looking for his next thing, and he wanted to be a partner in something, and we knew each other well enough that we thought, all right, let's give it a shot. And his name is Josh Lawrence, and it's a game changer for so many reasons. First of all, he's very strong on sales, and I tend to downplay myself. I used to. I'm better at that now, and he made sure that we were selling ourselves strongly to investors. You go through really hard times. Like when you're fundraising, it means that you're getting like maybe 100 no's, and the no's come after you have invested so much time and effort in trying to get to yes, that it's soul sucking. So when you're in it with someone else, it helps you
Even
like pick yourself up.
Even if it's some emotional support, it's good to have there.
Yeah,
So
it's a huge thing.
Two questions that came from this, what we were just talking about. One, I feel like I already forgot, but two, you mentioned, I think you said his name was Josh, right?
Yes, Josh Lawrence.
And no offense to Josh or anybody here, right? But this is just a thought that came to my head immediately. If the company that he was previously at, spent all their money, I don't know if it was, responsibly or not, but essentially they burnt through it and the company couldn't stay alive. Was that ever a red flag to you?
No, for many reasons, but one of which is, so in Israel, there's a very strong startup culture here. And right, like I think Israel has per capita second most startups after Silicon Valley, something like that in the world. And a lot of the startups are founded by failed founders, right? They gave it a go once and it failed.
It's like more than once, 100%.
And then the second time around they get it. And failure is not something to be embarrassed of. I mean, unless you're negligent or corrupt or whatever, but Josh is none of those things. He's very good at what he was doing. Things didn't come together. The stars didn't align. There's 1,000 million reasons why a startup won't succeed. Someone just said to us, you got to this point, but only 5% of startups get to this point. And we're early stage. So by this point, 95% of startups have failed. So like failure is okay.
Yeah.
But it also means the person has gained a lot of experience.
Oh, totally.
So, so that, it was not a red flag for me.
Awesome. And I just remember the second question. Have you always, because you were looking at this from relatively early on, point in time, did you always know that you were going to be raising funds?
Yes.
Okay.
I know that there's, the concept of bootstrapping, and I completely admire and bow to people who succeed in bootstrapping a SaaS product. I think that's huge. But I realized that you need to go all in, and in order to reach the growth, you need to fund it. And basically it comes down to the team, right? So it was Josh and myself. Eventually some tech people joined, but that was not enough to get us to where we want to go. And our vision was big. And when your vision is big, it takes resources to get there. So it was very clear very quickly that we needed to raise funding. What that meant was not clear. I recently found an early email where we were celebrating that someone was open to investing $25,000 in
Uh-huh.
us. And we were like super excited. And now the numbers that we talk about are a whole other scale.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So yeah, so we learned along the way what, you know, what we can achieve, what we should achieve in terms of fundraising.
Mhm.
And yeah, so
That's awesome. Now to talk a little bit more about the marketing approach and growth of the company. So far, again, you're still very, very early on, right? But what have been the best things that you've implemented so far that have actually, moved the needle, even if it's just a little bit?
we have a kind of unique advantage in that I'm a thought leader in the WordPress community, and WordPress is our target market,
Mm-hmm.
at least to start. You know, our vision includes potentially supporting other platforms as we go along, but to start, it's WordPress. WordPress is huge. It will keep us
Yeah.
busy for a very long time. So our marketing has consisted of me speaking at conferences, being active on social media, participating in online communities, getting interviewed, for example. And that has consistently driven traffic to us. I've managed to create some strategic connections with people who then become fans and talk about us to their own communities.
Mhm.
It hasn't been strategic or an aggressive or even proactive effort because we're actually not ready for that.
Okay.
But we have a constant influx and flow of users who are signing up to be, we're in beta, so they're signing up to be beta users, and that's keeping us plenty busy, and that's good for now.
Mhm.
One of our next hires is going to be a director of marketing, in order to turn that into something more strategic,
Mhm.
so that when we get to general availability, we can then have a push. But because also I'm not scalable, like
Yeah.
you can't scale marketing based on one person.
Mhm.
But what I've seen and what we've been advised is that an individual like myself in this type of role is important to continue
Yeah.
that type of activity, the thought leader, that kind of thing.
And you can see that across the board, right? And I think it's something that a lot of people are starting to, like, I feel like it's been around forever, like personal branding, right? And really just growing essentially your brand, which is Miriam, right? And I think you can really leverage that, and the fact that you have that going for you right now is huge. And you can just, if you think back to, really, like, there's no way to multiply myself, but really there is. When you see, for example, Gary Vaynerchuk all over the place, like, it's it's him, and it's multiplied, and he's talking to 100,000 people, obviously more than that, at any given moment, about something different. And I think that's something that you can leverage later on, where you're not only a thought leader at the conferences that you go to, but you're a thought leader whenever somebody wants to hear you or see you, say anything or talk about anything specific regarding the space. And that's when you're able to connect at a much bigger scale with everyone, and really leverage that personal brand that you've already started growing, to actually turn it into a lead generation machine for Strattic.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the way that Gary scales himself is that it's not just him doing it. He has a team around him, right?
Right.
Who's always making sure that they're creating content of his activity. And I guess we could go in that direction. Who knows? But yeah, you're totally right. I hadn't really thought about that in that way.
Now, what's been one of the most challenging things, and this is right now on a business point of view, right? I'll ask that again later on a more personal standpoint, which I have an idea of what it might be. But as far as at the office, like, what's the one thing that just seems to be always there challenging you?
Until recently, our biggest challenge really was fundraising, because we would hire people, and let's say also our AWS costs would increase, although we did get a lot of credits from AWS, so we're very grateful for that. Office space, we had free office space for a long time through another accelerator, which I eventually joined, called Mass Challenge, which is originally from Boston, actually. Massachusetts. That's why it's called Mass Challenge, for Massachusetts. So we sat there for a long time, but they started to charge us for office space. Anyways, costs increased,
Hmm.
and Josh and I, we had a very strong responsibility to keep things going. So we literally were running around the world doing fundraising. We started focused only on Israeli VCs.
Mhm.
That did not go well, and it ties into the fact that I'm a woman. We believe. So we eventually started traveling a ton to the West Coast, where we did have success. So that really was the biggest challenge, and I would say now that that's done, thankfully,
Mhm.
for now, um, hiring,
Yeah.
ramping up our team quickly is a big challenge.
Mhm. Okay. And why is that? Is it just finding the right talent, or is it the process of hiring people?
It's like a catch-22. So until now, let's say Josh and myself have been responsible also for admin and operations and all this type of stuff around it. And so we're still responsible for that. We also have to have the time now to work on the hiring process, which in and of itself is a full-time job,
Right.
because we're recruiting for a lot of positions, which means publicizing them, getting the funnel in, interviewing, second interviews, et cetera, et
A lot
cetera,
of
et
time.
cetera. It's huge. It's a
Yeah.
huge job. And I know that once that's done, we'll be in a great place in terms of being able to get more done
Mhm.
with the team and also ourselves, because we'll have offloaded a lot of what we're doing. Because one of the first hires we're doing is an admin ops person. Um, but in the meantime, we're like juggling a ton.
Totally.
It's just, it's a lot.
Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit more about the personal side of things, right? And I think to start off, I wanna bring something up that is, kind of like the elephant in the room sometimes. But what is it like to be a female founder? And you kind of brought that up earlier on, where going to VCs and stuff like that, it can be challenging. And I've talked to a couple of other women before in the same, in a similar position, that they've tried to fundraise, and they've, like, even though it's not it like, they feel like that's one of the things that is either limiting them, or maybe the reasons why they're not getting as much as they could be potentially getting. So I'd like to hear, like, your thoughts around that, and really, like, everything that encompasses being a female founder.
When I started out, so I had this misconception that because of the push to encourage diversity in the world of startups, and then eventually the Me Too movement, I would have an advantage being a female founder. I quickly learned that that was not at all the case, and it was a disadvantage. Someone said to me, a few people said to me at some point, "Well, you must have it a bit easier because you're a woman. People really want to invest in women." I was
Mhm.
like, "No, I it doesn't matter that I have a strong background in my industry. I'm a thought leader. Um, our market is huge. Like I check a ton of boxes.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter because when I walk into the room, I don't look like the founders that these investors have invested in before.
Yeah.
And when you're asking an investor to give you money, they're basically investing in the potential of you or the promise of you and what
Mm.
can be, right? Because especially at an early stage, you could make all the Excel business models in the
Yeah,
world, but
it's not factual.
it's not factual. It's
Right.
like a hope. It's a projection. I
Mm.
mean, there's something behind it, but it's not really concrete. So um, they're investing in the idea of you, and the 10 or 20 investments that they did before you, or 100, were in someone who really doesn't look like you.
Right.
So there's that discomfort, and I think it's not conscious. I think it's
Totally. I think
subconscious.
it's very subconscious, and especially when you mentioned, that you were traveling around the world going after investment, and you mentioned that once you came into the West, it seemed like it was a little bit easier. But even then, I still very strongly believe that there is, a lot of, barriers as far as entering, what is the startup world and the VC world, to get that investment from those people.
Yeah. Raising funding for everyone is incredibly challenging, and the odds are against you. And regardless of where you are fundraising, as a person who doesn't look like the standard founder, it will work against you. But we did find that on the West Coast, it was much easier. I think a few factors come into play, because I recently was reading some stats about investment in female founders, and the states are, it's not necessarily better in terms of the percentage of investment funds going to women founders. But there's just so much more money there,
Yeah.
especially in the West Coast, that your chances of getting invested in are higher.
Mhm.
So so the Israeli investors were for really the vast majority of them, with a few exceptions, but that's always the case, were nice and pleasant and supportive.
Mhm.
Um, but I didn't fit the mold. Actually, the truth is that Josh doesn't fit the mold either, because neither of us are native Israelis. We both immigrated from North America. So, they're used to an Israeli who went to a particular unit in the army,
Mhm.
and I was a guy and all that. Once we went to the States, those stigmas were gone.
Mhm.
And I did feel like I was being judged as a founder, not as a woman. And we met and so there were a few interesting things that happened, but one story really stands out for me. We
Mhm.
met one young male investor, and we had this whole meeting with him, told him our whole thing. And at the end, we were walking out, and he said, "Miriam, I read somewhere that you have 7 kids." I was like, "Oh crap," because that's like a really weird thing
Yeah.
to know about you. Like,
Uh-huh.
it's very unusual. Not only am I a woman, I also have 7 kids. I was
Right.
like, "Yeah, I know it's really unusual, but yeah, it's true." He's like, "No, I think that's incredible, and it means you're a badass." I was like, "Oh my
That's
god."
awesome. Yeah.
That that was like, he
Well,
really.
it can be taken in many different ways, right? And the two that I can think of right now is, one, you're going to be super busy at home, or two, you're going to be really, really good at dealing with like things all the time. So
Right.
it's really like how are you going to look at it? And I think it all comes down to, obviously, like, and this is all going to be for the most part, I think, subconscious, right? To how the specific person that's viewing it, what their experience is, kind of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I've heard the saying, like, if you want something done, ask a busy person to do it,
Hmm.
because busy people are just used to like efficiently using their time and like making things happen. So I do think that's something I learned from being a parent.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I would never have gotten that type of response, I think, in Israel.
Hmm.
I don't publicize, like, only now am I starting to talk publicly about, my personal parenting situation, because I know that it can work against me. But I think it's important for people to know that is a thing, that people are moms and dads, and
Right,
they
and I
also,
think it's good
you know,
too for just to really, bring it into the world, right? Like, I mean, it's not that you're hiding it or anything like that, but in a sense, it's kind of, if it's not said, you're almost giving the wrong impression to, say, another woman that is in a similar position, and just because she doesn't see somebody out there doing it, she might stop herself and say, "Well, I don't see any founder with 7 kids, or maybe even 5, so."
right.
Am I going to be that good? But now that you're kind of like putting that in front and showcasing it, right? Maybe not necessarily showcasing, but just putting it in front and owning to it, you can have a positive impact, I think, with the fact that, like, women are going to go out and see, wow, like, she's doing that. And they're going to say the exact same thing that investor said, right? That you're a badass, and, like, obviously, like, she knows how to handle a lot of things at once and stuff like that. So I think it's awesome that you're doing
Thank you. And that's really important to me. Like, I want to be, in Israel, I go to speak to groups of young female students who are studying engineering, whenever I can, in order for them to see a person who looks like them
that.
and
Mhm.
be like, okay, I don't know if you're going to choose to be a founder, but just so you know, this is possible. It's not just for men or for people you don't identify with. Here I am. You
Right.
can do this too. And yeah, so exactly what you're saying. And also for women to say, "Oh, I'm a mother of 3, 4, 2." It's all complicated and hard, and I juggle that well.
Mhm.
So, doesn't I'm not limited. I can use those skills for other things as well. That's how I see it.
That's awesome. Now we're getting kind of close here. So last couple questions. One, what is something that you're not very good at?
Oh my gosh. Um, I'm not very good at a lot of things, but I've gotten better at it, but only thanks to Josh. I what I do the way I would describe our myself. Okay, first of all, I was terrible at talking about myself.
Mm,
I would always be like, "Oh, I kind of know what I'm doing." Like, terrible.
yeah.
I've gotten better at that. And the other thing is, when I would talk about our product, I would be like, "So it can be really good, but at the moment it's full of bugs." you know, and I'd be really like, I'd get into the details and be very honest where we're at and not talk about vision, which is what you need to be talking about. So that was really bad. Oh my gosh, why am I blanking on what I'm not good at? I'm not good at so many things. I actually, okay, so here's something. I am not good at going into a crowd. I'm weirdly introverted in certain situations, even though I can get up on a stage and talk in
Yeah,
front of
crazy.
people. But I'll go into like a crowd and men in suits, that really intimidates me. I'm like, oh, they're executives, oh man.
Yeah.
So
Well, so are you.
I know, but I don't look like an executive, and so it just that can really intimidate me, and then I like freeze up, and I don't know what to say. It takes me a while to thaw out. If Josh was on this call, he could he could really give you a list of things I'm not good at.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Another question here. If you could go back to day one, what would you have told yourself after, this journey so far?
In many ways, I'm happy I didn't know things.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure I would fill myself in on what it's really like. For example, how long it would take us to fundraise, how long it would take us to get anywhere, the painful things that I would end up going through
Yeah.
as part of this process. In many ways, it's better not to know and to go into it hopeful and being like, oh, the average fundraising is between 6 months and 3 years. We'll do it in 6 months.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I would. Yeah, I don't know if I would go
Yeah.
back and tell myself something. I think what I knew was
Uh-huh.
good to make me be like, I can do this.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's super cool. And last question. Do you have any questions for me, Miriam?
Yeah. So why do you interview SaaS founders? What is interesting about this to you?
One, I love so I started back in agency world, right? I used to work at 2 agencies, and I worked with really every single industry you could think of, anywhere from like HVAC to your mom and pops, like, dentists down the street and stuff like that. I worked with some SaaS companies, and I really enjoyed them. I think, once I did that, and I built my own agency, I really liked the way that the SaaS world just kind of like worked. I was really about the ecosystem and the very, very strong entrepreneurial, spirit that everyone has, that you just go like sit down, work, and get your shit done kind of thing. But I just loved that, and the energy that everyone has. I think it's very upbeat. Everyone wants to do something. Everyone wants to, make it big and stuff like that. And I think it's awesome. And not only that, but aside from that, obviously working with SaaS companies, being able to provide the service that's going to help them get to that next level once they're ready to do so, right? Helping them scale and helping them get noticed. And I think, for example, and I think this goes for any industry, whether you're a doctor or a software company, right? If you have a solution and I can help you get it in front of the people, I think it's the moral, right? It's your ethical responsibility to get something that works and helps people, to get them on their hands, because it's going to make them better and make them, really. So kind of like a doctor, right? If you have the solution to something and you're not getting it out there, you're doing a disservice to not only your job but also the people that you should be servicing. So that's kind
I
of
like that.
that's my little spiel.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point of view, because people say, oh, you're a service provider, you're doing it so you can make a living, which is true. But
Yeah.
we're also doing it in order to help other people do what they're doing well, give
Right.
them the tools that can make their lives better. So I like that.
Good. So
Nice.
that wraps about the podcast. But thank you so much, Miriam, for being on here. It was really a pleasure having you. I had a lot of fun. And for anyone that's watching or listening, make sure you like the podcast, subscribe, give us a review if you like the podcast, or a bad review if you hate it. But thank you so much for being on here today, Miriam.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Good. Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.